All right, welcome to our second video for English 123 for week 4. For this video, we're going to be discussing the rhetorical situation, the concept of the rhetorical situation, and how it relates to our research paper that's coming up next week for our first draft. You may have had some experience in discussing rhetoric in a previous course, but I think for this course at this time, it'd be a good idea just to kind of focus in on what is rhetoric and what does it mean by a rhetorical situation, and how does that really relate to our particular writing process. So just as a rough definition of rhetoric, it really refers to the deliberate use of language for a specific purpose with a specific goal in mind. Using words to persuade somebody or to manipulate somebody. So there's both sides of it, unfortunately. But for our purposes, we're looking to persuade someone, not necessarily to manipulate them. One of the most common understandings of rhetoric, or say probably one of the most common ways that you've probably heard of rhetoric, is referred to in politics. So it's most common used in political communication. You hear this person's rhetoric or that person's rhetoric or whatever candidate. It's typically around election season. You hear a lot more about rhetoric. So these politicians are using language in a specific way to gain a specific goal or a specific outcome. They're trying to persuade you for their vote, but they're also trying to persuade you for their particular perception of their ideas and the perception of themselves, their image. So there's visual rhetoric as well, and there's speech, oratory rhetoric, and then there's written rhetoric. Historically, oratory rhetoric goes all the way back to the Greeks and Romans. In their culture, they highly valued oratory skill. The ability for a speech giver or an orator to persuade an audience, to inspire an audience through some kind of dynamic speech, really captivating their audience. So that was a really valued skill in the ancient world, and that somewhat translated into the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, and then eventually made its way into the modern academic university. So rhetoric has a role in what we do because we are attempting to persuade based on our argument. We're trying to persuade through research and evidence, right? But there can be a bit of a craft to what you write and the way you write and the way you attempt to persuade. So it's worth considering those attributes. So I thought we would focus on that for this video. So first consideration is why have you chosen your particular topic? Understanding why you've chosen that topic and why you are arguing your particular argument for that topic. So understanding that will help you understand your rhetorical situation. Actually, let me back up a little bit. So we've defined rhetoric. I kind of got ahead of myself. We defined rhetoric, but then what's the situation part that goes along with this? And it's an interesting concept. Rhetorical situation, so it is understanding the context of your argument. And by understanding the context of your argument, you are then able to strategize your use of language to persuade your reader. That's really what the rhetorical situation is referring to. Understanding the context of your particular topic and argument to the degree that you're then able to strategize how to effectively persuade, based on your use of language, persuade your reader to accept or consider your particular argument. So that's really a loose definition, I would say, of rhetorical situation, understanding context. So if you think situation, just think of context. If you think of situation, think of how something is situated within the context of something, situated in terms of relationship amongst other things, whether objects or people or ideas. The situation of the rhetoric is really with regard to context. Okay. So then back to what I was saying. So then you want to consider your motivation. If you understand your motivation for why you have chosen that topic, then you can begin to answer the so what question. Why? So what's the significance? Why is your topic important? The reader wants to be able to get a sense that your topic and your argument is important. Your reader wants to be able to have an implied understanding, an inferred understanding as far as this is an important topic to this person. That needs to come through in the writing in some way. And that's really up to you. But it's not an explicitly stating it. This is important to me because, or I chose this topic because. It doesn't need to be stated. It needs to be just kind of understood through the passion of the writing or through the word choices that you're using that helps the reader think, hey, this person is really passionate about this, right? And it's not necessarily emotive, I would say, entirely. But there's some idea of that behind it. So anyway, so then that also then leads to an understanding of your audience. And I know this has come up quite a bit in our pre-writing exercises, but yes, audience is so important to the rhetorical situation because that's who you're writing to. You're writing to an audience. So your audience is an intellectually minded, philosophically minded, academically minded audience that wants to know the significance of this argument and wants to know why, or have an understanding as far as why. So then we want to understand the context, the overall context of your argument, and how your argument fits in that context, and how it could potentially fill some of the gaps in the understanding of your topic, gaps in the understanding of your argument. So inevitably, in the broad spectrum of the research that's taken place for your topic, there are, to one degree or another, gaps within that research and within that understanding of the topic. And it is worth considering where your topic and argument fit in or fill in one of those gaps. And it's also worth considering how or what gap your topic and argument fit in with the understanding of the audience. So what are the gaps that the audience have, and what are the gaps that are in the research conversation that's taking place? So as we're considering more of the context of your topic, understanding the opposing views. So it's not just necessarily the gaps, but it's also the opposing views and the overall conversation. So then not necessarily just opposing views, but also agreeing views. Like what is being said altogether about your topic? That again, that's all part of the rhetorical situation. Understanding the conversation taking place within the research community, the conversation, understanding that's taking place between the opposing view and the agreeing view, and as I said, any kind of gaps that are in there, and where your audience plays into that. Where are they at in all of this? Are they the opposing view? Are they in the middle? Are they in between? So there's all these different considerations that need to be taken into account. Then also, in addition to that, understanding and acknowledging the complexity of your topic. That your view is not necessarily the only view. There's multiple views, there's multiple positions, there's multiple perspectives. So as these considerations begin to compound, there's a lot of complexity that begins to develop. The situation becomes more complex, but it's worth considering and understanding for you to, overall begin to strategize how you want to approach your argument in relationship to all these things. So then the way you do that then is to begin to frame your argument. And we're familiar with photo cropping and photo manipulation. You can pick out a particular part of or exclude a particular part of a photo. It's the same concept with framing an argument. Situating an argument. You have a situation. Now situate your argument within that context, within that situation, rhetorically, with a specific purpose, with a specific strategy to be able to effectively support your claim. So then as you consider the context, consider the overall situation, you can begin to strategize and think, okay, where do I want to go with this? Where is my argument going to be? Now you already have your argument, but how are you going to begin to revise your argument or begin to sand down your argument or whittle down your argument, crafting your argument, specifically focusing your argument? So right now you have a general thesis statement that you're working on. It's not completely set in stone right now. But as you begin to understand the rhetorical situation, you can begin to customize and alter your argument based on these particular things: the conversation taking place, the opposing and agreeing views, your audience, their assumptions, their expectations. That's the situation that this particular writing assignment finds itself. So then for you as the writer, it's important for you then to begin to strategize, and I use strategizing and framing and cropping synonymously. How are you going to approach your argument? And really only you can determine that. And that might seem a bit overwhelming, like, oh, what is this? You're just making this sound that much more complicated than it needs to be. Well, no, those are just all the considerations that go into an actual research paper. They're the things that help you build that content to meet the 10 pages. As you begin to address the situation, as you begin to address the opposing views, as you begin to use the agreeing views to support your claim, and then as you begin to understand those assumptions and expectations of the audience, then you can begin to deliberately craft the composition of your paper to meet those particular expectations and those particular assumptions. Okay, with the intent of supporting your argument for the audience to agree or consider your view. Okay, so that's the rhetorical situation. It's an interesting concept, and it's a valuable concept to understand, and it may take some time for you to, kind of think it over. And you've got the next 4 weeks, your final, the next 3 weeks. Your final draft isn't due until the end of week 7, so you have some time to think this over. And as you go into the composition stage, as you begin drafting your paper, you can then begin to think on, okay, what's this overall situation that I find myself in? And I can't really give you specifics because every situation is different. Even if you have, two students with the same topic, they're going to be in different situations. They're different writers. They're different papers. So every paper has a different situation, context that it's in. So it's really up to you to, determine or discover that situation and be aware of it and be attuned to it, and then begin to kind of, just consider those details. So let's move on. Another aspect of rhetoric is there's 3 attributes I wanted to make you aware of. And you probably have already heard these, but they're important to understand and consider as you go into the drafting stage of your research paper. There's the logos, the ethos, and the pathos of rhetoric. This is traditional classical rhetoric. So logos is logic. It's another, the word logos means, it's a derivative of logic. So it's the logical reasoning through your paper. It is the evidence-based, outline-based support of your argument. So as as you're working on your paper and you're going through your evidences and you're supporting it logically and reasonably, and then your reader reads that and they're able to see the logic in your writing. Okay, I can understand where they're going with their argument. They can understand it. They can see that it's a reasonable argument and it's reasonable support for that argument based on your sources. That's the logos. But it's not alone. Not just logos alone will not persuade your reader. There's also the ethos. Now, ethos is you. It's your credibility, and it's also the credibility of your sources. And then it's also your presentation of the facts, your presentation of the rhetorical situations. You're strategizing to the rhetorical situation, how you're navigating the rhetorical situation. That's the ethos. It's also your own style of delivery and how your own personal writing style, the word choices that you make. All of those things develop your credibility, your ethos as the writer. So the logos, the logic, and the support, the evidence of your topic and your argument combined with the ethos, your credibility, the credibility of your sources, your presentation and your navigation of the rhetorical situation, and your own particular style and approach to the diction and word usage of communication. That then also combines with what's known as pathos. And pathos is your audience. Pathos is the play of emotion of the audience, playing with the emotion of the audience, playing to the emotion of the audience. So it's somewhat theatrical, but it's not just emotion for emotion's sake. You play into the anger, the assumed anger of the audience, the assumed sorrow of the audience, fear of the audience, the joy, the hope, their hopes, their sorrows, their anger, their fears. You begin to tap into those particular emotional characteristics of the audience that then begin to emphasize what your point is. Um, this needs to be done with balance, of course. We don't want to overly emote our paper to where it just becomes, trying to incite anger or trying to incite sorrow or fear, nor do we want to be overly inciting joy or over inciting hope or hopelessness. So, but we want to play to those things. We want to, well, I shouldn't say play, we want to write to those things. We want to hopefully tap into those things within the reader to pull out an emotional response that's in conjunction with the logic and the reasonability of your argument, and then also your own credibility. So they look at you as a credible writer. They look at your argument and the logic as being sound and trustworthy, and it begins to resonate with them emotionally. It taps into something they have inside, an existing frustration or angst that they may have, an existing fear that they may have, an existing hope that they have in something for the future, all those things. So as those all combine together, that's where rhetoric really begins to, that's where it really is, it's most effective. That's where it really shines, for lack of a better word, for what it is. And so really rhetoric is one of those tools that, depending on who's using it, whether it turns out to be good or bad. But of course our purposes are for good. We want to persuade for good, but it's always good to understand that it's a double-edged sword. It's something that can be used for bad and for good. So our purposes are for good. So these are things to consider as you approach the composition stage here coming up in week 5. So again, if you have any questions, please let me know, and I'll certainly clarify for you. So this is really supplemental information for you. Again, your reading and your exercises are going to provide you the specifics, and then this is just another layer on top of what you're already learning from the details from the syllabus. So again, let me know if you need any further clarification, and good luck as you work on your papers and working towards completing the course. All right, take it easy.